All right, sorry, Brian. I think I took that a little long. Welcome back to another Boxscore Geek Show. I'm your host, Ray Alvarez. With me, as always, is Brian Foster. We're going to be talking Rudy Gobert, chess, mental samurai, and a litany of other subjects because there are no live sports, but there are always live sports nerds. How you doing, Brian?
Good, yeah, it's good to be back, and I can't believe you're saying there's no live sports. Apparently, you didn't watch the ESPN horse tournament. We got to see Chauncey Billups have a comeback against Trae Young. You
What
know,
Devin Book, 2K
the
champions?
2K champions. I have to say though, it's a little bit nice to see the big networks, kind of using the same technology we are for our show. So, media's kind of been flattened by the quarantine. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and then to explain that the teaser, and we'll probably talk it closer to the end. It's a little more of a tangential topic, but we kind of had a lot of election news in the last 2 weeks relating to my state of Wisconsin. Go Pack, go! In that we had a really bizarre thing. If you're in the future, and I'd be shocked if you've forgotten this, but the coronavirus pandemic of 2020, 2020, 2020. I think you could still say that, right? That's still legal, right, Brian? Although I think you'd say 2020. All right, but of the COVID pandemic of 2020, the Wisconsin elections occurred on April 7th. However, there were a few problems. The first is while our state does support mail-in balloting if you register, some people registered to receive their mail-in ballots and did not receive them on time. And through a cascading effect leading all the way up to the bullshit Supreme Court that is held by the Republican Party. And unfortunately, if you're unaware of this in 2020, hopefully this is a thing of the past in the future, or hopefully you're already aware of this if you're listening to us the same week. The court has really become partisan, which is a huge bummer. And so essentially, this decision bubbled all the way up to the Supreme Court, where a virtual group of Supreme Court justices voted that if you did not have a mail-in ballot, you still had to vote in person, and there would not be any lateness to it. So if this makes any sense, you are allowed to have your ballot counted late if you have a legitimate reason. The courts basically ruled that not receiving your mail-in ballot on time was not a legitimate reason, such that if you still wanted to vote, you need to go vote in person. For what it's worth, a reminder, Wisconsin, I think, is one of all but 8 states. Hopefully that's less by the time we're recording this, Brian. But like the last I checked in, 42 states had basically issued stay-at-home orders saying, only go out for essential business. That still gets weird and political and weirdness too. As an example, the WWE has filed to say they are an essential business, whatever that means, Brian. But regardless, Wisconsin
I
is a
think there's
state
some
that
news about that today that Linda McMahon made some kind of contribution to get that rolling. So, the McMahons are in tight with Trump and have been for decades. So that's not a surprise.
is what it is. But that being said, Wisconsin essentially had a stay-at-home quarantine order, and then as a result, a bunch of polling places got shut down. As an example, I believe Milwaukee is supposed to have 180. They got reduced to 5, and then they still said you had to do in-person voting, which for a disease that says don't have a lot of people in clustered places is who the hell would think that was a good idea? And that kind of knocked the wind out of our sails. I said, the reason we are and are not podcasting, we've been kind of doing load management. We were doing that before the corona pandemic. And then you wisely noted, Brian, without necessarily live data to fuel our podcast. And then, of course, the fact that we're both beat up emotionally, as is, I would hope, everybody in the United States. Like I think I've heard this a bunch on Twitter and other places. If you're feeling down, it's okay to feel down. This isn't normal. This isn't fine. Like, it's not, the whole like always be cheery attitude is in some ways, I think, unhealthy, but it is pushed a lot, right? Like, we can get through it. Look on the bright side, the whole thoughts and prayer rhetoric. When stuff sucks, it's okay to be like, this sucks, and that's just being human. And so, we've kind of, both you and I have been a little more down. And then that election, that news knocked the wind out of our sails. I was very upset as well. I'm a Wisconsin resident. The goodish news is that I voted by ballot and have signed up to vote by ballot, which you can do. So at Wisconsin, if you do it, I think it's like myvote.gov or something. Look it up. Just Google like Wisconsin vote. There is a checkbox, and you can say all ballots for the remainder of the year give me by mail, and sign up for that. If you're ahead of the curve on that, it's great. The problem was a bunch of people did that in response to Corona, and then didn't get their ballots in time because this has happened to a bunch of government services. They got flooded by people responding. We've had this with like unemployment and the stimulus checks, et cetera. And so they're behind because they've been flooded with people that are responding now. So do that now so you don't have to worry about future elections. And hopefully by that time, there may be more legislation, et cetera, in place if the Democratic Party in Congress actually tries to take a stand, which they need to do, and try and make mail-in balloting more effective. That would be a good thing. That knocked the wind out of our sails. The goodish news, Brian, fast forward to this week. The election results are in, and a few things happened that are good. Let me make sure I get the name correct. But let's see. So this was the first. So it's Jill, and I just changed the page to
Karofsky.
Thank you, Jill Karofsky.
I gave you a few seconds, but I had to jump in.
Jill Karofsky. Well, what happened? I did the stupid thing. It was in the headline. So I was like, well, you know what I should do, Brian? I should click on the link and then try and read it instead of just reading it off the headline, which I should have done. But Jill Karofsky basically defeated an incumbent Supreme Court justice who was appointed by Scott Walker, which doesn't happen. So that was amazing. So obviously she's the Democratic one. This is a huge stepping point in that it helps the Wisconsin Supreme Court get closer to even or a Democratic majority. For those that don't know, it's very frustrating about being in the state, Brian. Wisconsin is really a blue state if you look at the popular vote, right? This is very electoral college based. When you look at how the state is districted and you look at how many legislative seats the Republicans hold, it is way disproportionate. And this essentially happened in 2010, 2011. The Republican Party, while they still had control, did a lot of work to basically keep control for the future. It's a very frustrating playbook, Brian. Apologies, I started us with politics. We're going to start with Rudy Gobert, but I'll keep this going a little longer and we'll get to basketball. As an example, like our ex-governor, Scott Walker, Republican, right after he lost the election, started immediately passing a bunch of legislation to restrict power of the, upcoming governor, Tony Evers. It's a frustrating playbook to have while we're in power, if we're going to do everything to change the rules to keep power or hobble our opposing party in the future if they get power, is what it is. But at least we're seeing some progress in Wisconsin on that front. Another good piece of news, my home city of Appleton, Wisconsin, our mayor won, Jake Woodford, who I joked kind of looks like Thanos, Brian. I made that joke before Corona happened. So I was like, this is funny. And then we had that happen. I was like, wow, that joke did not age well at all. But, he is, of course, the more liberal of the candidates. The other candidate, I wasn't aware of this until reading about it after the fact. Apparently, our former mayor, Mayor Hanna, who was awesome, right when he was elected in 1994, instituted an Office of Diversity. He made a diversity coordinator for the city, which is amazing. And Mayor Hanna, nothing but good things to say about him, served the city of Appleton well for 24 years, 26 years, holy cow, because it was 94, right? Just a great person, was in theory a Republican. But what I love about this, Brian, we know this about politics, is if you read what Mayor Hanna says about politics, he's like, I'm a Republican, so that means this. He's like, I'm a Republican, so that means we need strong safety social nets and good things for our citizens and inclusion. It's like, yeah, you can apparently just say I'm a Republican and that means this, and people will just be like, oh yeah, I agree, because that doesn't. It's more sports teams than politics, right, Brian? An amazing mayor, but apparently the competitor for the mayoral election was going against the diversity candidate, diversity inclusion operator from the beginning. Very homophobic, transphobic, et cetera person. So I'm happy the right person won the election. It's good to get a little bit of good news in the midst of all of this, especially like the seventh knocked the wind out of the sails, because the belief was, and this may have bitten them as a result, the belief was the Republican Party wanted that Supreme Court justice seat and was under the impression that if they let people vote by mail, as I mentioned, Wisconsin is a blue state by popular vote, that the Democrats would win it that way.
Well,
so
if I can jump in real quickly, Dre, Trump himself said it in the past week publicly, right? He said, if everyone is allowed to vote, the Republicans will never win. Yeah, he literally said that on camera.
Well, I even noted that with Wisconsin, one of the reasons Wisconsin went red in 2016 for Trump is that there was something known. I might mess up the term, so apologies. Isn't yeah, I want to make it clear I'm not like a legal scholar in any sense, so I might mess up terms. So hopefully this is just. So I just want that clear before I go down. There's the Voter Rights Act that was like implemented in like the 60s,
Yep.
and it was supposed to basically allow for more inclusive voting. And unfortunately, thanks to the Supreme Court getting flipped, a lot of those rights got changed. And so in 2016, there were a lot of voters that were either purged or weren't able to easily get voting. Wisconsin implemented voter ID rules, which are very restrictive. And then these compound, right? A voter ID rule is overly restrictive, and then the state also makes it pretty difficult to get an ID for certain groups of people, primarily minorities that don't drive. So if you have poor minorities that can't get IDs and then as a result can't vote, you get less people on the ballot. So Wisconsin, if the Voter Rights Act had stayed as it was, would have easily gone to Hillary, but as a result, it went to Trump. And so, yeah, there have been, and as you were saying, this exact same playbook there was kind of the same idea, saying we've got to let our in-person people vote, because if we do late voting and mail-in voting, we're going to get more Democrats voting. And what potentially might have hurt them is Milwaukee had fewer polling places than Madison. And if you know Wisconsin, Madison is the capital, the blue hub of Wisconsin, and Milwaukee is one of the most redlined states in United States history. Brian, that's a fun distinction.
Wasn't there a Milwaukee Bucks player that I'm trying to remember who it was a few years ago who got involved with the cops?
All right, we got two stories on that, Brian.
Yeah.
John Henson, a Milwaukee Bucks.
John Henson, yeah.
No, this is the nicer one, Brian. Unfortunately. So John Henson, and let me just make sure I get the other name 100% right, because I'm pretty sure I know it, and I'm pretty sure I've got it, but I want to make sure I don't say anything incorrect. Okay, but John Henson went to a place called like White Harbor or Whitefish Bay to buy some jewelry, and the owner locked the door and called the police on him. So basically, they saw a black person in a fancy car drive up to the store, and they locked the car and called the police on him. So that's John Henson, former Bucks. Malcolm Brogdon illegally parked at either a Walgreens or a CVS late night. So admittedly, Malcolm Brogdon, you're better than this. Don't I think he if I remember, and I apologize if I'm getting this wrong, because other athletes have done similar things. He was either parked in a handicap stall or doubly parked across a handicap stall. One of the two. Either, come on, Brogdon, you're better.
I mean, I'll give him a pass because he's probably a kid in his early 20s at the time, right? Like that's something you can imagine happening, right? You know, an immature kid doing that.
So he did that, and then the cops were called, and they wound up tasing him. And so this should be stressed. This is Malcolm Brogdon, Rookie of the Year, star player for the Milwaukee Bucks. A bunch of people, rightly so, were upset that the Milwaukee Bucks let him walk. You know, he's signed to, if not a max contract, close to a max contract with the Indiana Pacers now. He is named for Malcolm X, and he has spoken up. He has spoken up against segregation in Milwaukee. So yeah, basically, the Milwaukee police tased a star basketball player because he was illegally parked. And as we note, it never flies with us if you go, well, he was doing something wrong, so it's okay. You go, listen, the fine for being illegally parked in a handicap stall late night in probably, you know, I go to Walgreens and CVS out in Appleton. It's not as big as Milwaukee, but, you know, if you're doing it late night, that's one of the benefits of living out here, Brian, when we're not locked down under pandemic, is unlike you big, stupid cities, we're not crowded. We don't have crowds. We don't have traffic. It's much nicer. That is the nice part about a smaller state, although it means they shouldn't have a sports team. So Milwaukee Bucks should not be here. They should be in Chicago. But yeah, you know, it never flies if you say, well, he did something wrong, so he deserved that punishment. It's like, no, being tased is actually dangerous. And, you know, for certain people, right, you can choke on your tongue. It's dangerous. It's not something that should occur. That shouldn't have happened. But yeah, exactly what we're saying. Milwaukee had that happen with Malcolm Brogdon. As I mentioned, it's one of the most redlined states. Redline, for those that don't know, is banks and governments intentionally saying that minorities, particularly African Americans, are not allowed to buy or get loans for housing in specific areas to intentionally keep them segregated. That's a huge part of the United States history, Brian, which is rough. Wow, I really went swinging with politics to start the show, Brian. But anyway, so that's Milwaukee. Like I said, Madison is more liberal. Madison had more polling places than Milwaukee. Although good news is, like, even like where I live, even Green Bay, multiple counties voted for Jill for Supreme Court. So that is good news. So I was happy by by that, and we'll see where it ends up.
Yeah, the pandemic hasn't really stopped this fight at all. And basically over whether we're going to remain a democracy or not. Like that's what's on the ballot in 2020. So that's probably the most important thing that's going to happen aside from fighting the pandemic between now and November is this fight over mail-in ballot access, and it's going to be a big one. I'm not sure what's going to happen. It'll be weird if all the blue and purple states get it and the red states don't. Like that seems like that might even hurt Trump, but yeah, it's going to be a big fight. Trump is not taking his foot off the gas of trying to destroy the government during this time. Like he's trying to use relief efforts to be a slush fund to put money in his own pocket and buy political influence, among other things. Here's one thing I just want to get off my chest briefly while we're in the politics section is whenever he says, I'm a wartime president now, this is a war against the pandemic, what he means is I'm the commander in chief and I'm going to send like tens of thousands of people out there to die and sacrifice themselves for whatever, the economy or whatever he thinks. And of course he's wrong-headed in that, but that's what him and his surrogates are saying right now is, all these regular working people, they're pretty much cattle and they need to die for my cause. And his supporters are going for that too, even though they are at risk themselves because, they're pushing this kind of post-apocalyptic religious narrative that this plague was sent by God to the cities, to wipe out. I'm serious. This is something that's happening right now. It's sent to the cities to wipe out our enemies who are, people of color, gay people, and all that, people that live in the cities. So there's really a stark battle going on outside of the pandemic, and it's terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, you summed it up nicely there. I might have a segue to our first topic from that, Brian.
Good.
You just brought up the rhetoric that Trump uses, and it frustrates me that strikes home to a lot of people. The wartime president, and we have to sacrifice, and that is a subject that comes up all the time on this show. Is something in sports that we dislike, the machismo culture of sacrifice above all else, etc., and its weakness to show emotion. Because again, the solution to the pandemic was slow things down, take things easy, quarantine, improve testing, improve testing, trust the professionals, essentially slow down, stop and think, right? And a lot of people hate that mentality, right? A lot of the thinking we tend to lionize in this country is the take charge, solve things. A point I'm hearing about even the pandemic right now, which is bonkers to me, is when you do things right in preparation and nothing happens, and then people go, you were overreacting because nothing happened. You go, that's why we prepared. We're seeing that already, right? Where, how do you pronounce the doctor's name? Fauci.
Oh, Fauci. Yeah.
Thank you, because I knew I was going to mess it up. So Fauci, has been coming out and was saying numbers like 100 to 200,000 people could die in the United States alone, right? It has passed 100,000 globally, I believe. But he was saying that, and then of course we're where we're at now, and we have over 20,000 confirmed deaths. We're in an interesting position, right, where we can't be sure of the number of people that have died or had complications that just weren't tested. But we have 20 plus thousand, and people are like, you were overreacting. And first off, it's like, are you really saying 20,000 deaths is not a problem? Like, are you okay with that? But it gets very frustrating when the kind of stop and think, slow down mentality results in nothing bad happening versus the responding to a crisis. One of those gets a lot more praise than the other, which is frustrating. And so we've talked about that in sports. And in fact, one of the players we've talked about that in regards to, see that, Brian, I got it, is Rudy Gobert. Because for those that don't recall, Rudy Gobert is a multiple Defensive Player of the Year award winner. And Rudy Gobert in his last contract, I don't know if it's his rookie contract or his first contract, in one of his contracts, had an incentive about making the All-Star team worth $1 million. And Rudy Gobert did not make the All-Star game and cried on camera about it, and of course was getting mocked for this. And interestingly enough, another story to Rudy Gobert's history, not even the most, this will be a blip if ever on his radar, Brian, was there was a game where he got ejected for a technical foul that was, if I recall 100%, Brian, was a BS technical. Like he got like baited. It might have been against Harden. And he got upset as he was leaving and he smacked the cup off the table. And what we've talked about before in regards to those two kind of actions is the crying on camera gets mocked, even though like if you came up to either one of us and said $1 million and we said yes, and we said, sorry, some TV reporter doesn't want you to have it, so you don't have it, I'd probably cry. If you, and that's again, as I started the show, that's not a wrong response. Like feeling emotion is not a problem. It is not a weakness to properly assess what is going on and react according to it. It is so frustrating when that mentality is mocked as showing weakness or whatever. Whereas the other, right, Rudy Gobert acted out impulsively in anger in a way. I mean, he was already teched up, right? Doing that, hitting the cup off the table. If he gets another technical foul, what's the number, right? Like 16? 16 technical fouls
for the season? Yeah, I don't remember.
This was something Rasheed Wallace was amazing at.
Yes.
Back but essentially, if you get two technical fouls in a game, you are removed from the game. A technical foul, again, shock you're listening to this show if you don't know. Technical foul basically means you did a foul that was so bad, the ref stopped the game, gives the opponent a free throw, then gives the opponent the ball. You have a foul, and if that happens twice in a game, you are removed for the remainder of the game. And if you reach, I believe, 16 in a season, you are actually suspended for another game. So, and I don't recall if it stacks. I'll have to look up the technical foul rules, Brian. It's very boring. But essentially, to the point about Rudy Gobert, nobody really got mad at the cup thing. I mean, it was of course like laughed at, but people were not mocking it, even though he just got two technical fouls and ejected. If the refs got really upset, they could have assessed him a third technical foul, which means he's essentially 1/5 of the way to missing another game, which is key for the Utah Jazz's winning thing. So we have always kind of hated that culture. And of course, the epitome of this culture that we hit the end of, which I want to be careful and say Rudy Gobert was the tipping point to the NBA closing and mainstream taking Corona seriously.
Absolutely.
I think that is true. However, I think it would be disingenuous to note that if it had not happened with Rudy Gobert, it was going to happen elsewhere. So it's a rough one, right? Where it's like he is going to be in the history books forever for this. But if you removed Rudy Gobert, we would have gotten to the same place probably in about the same amount of time regardless.
Yeah, we said this last time. There's players that have been diagnosed but have not been said publicly who they are. Like players on the Lakers, for instance, some players on other teams. So
had that happen where Wilson Chandler basically in some nice racism, his office was his apartment complex was saying they heard a Nugget had Corona. They had to know if he had it before letting him in and stuff. It was ridiculous. But yeah, but again, for those who don't recall, because it's been almost a month now, Rudy Gobert, in response to the coronavirus, in a press briefing, touched all of the microphones and desks after it, and then briefly after was assessed with the coronavirus, as well as his teammate, Donovan Mitchell. Obviously, the fallout of that was directly, this was incredible, he was held out due to injury or illness against a game against the Oklahoma City Thunder. Oklahoma was like, you have to tell us what's going on, and found out right before tip-off that a player on the Jazz had been assessed with the coronavirus, and the game was called. Then the NBA season was shut down after that night, and one more game, and then a Sacramento Kings game almost went on and was canceled right before tip-off as well. So all of that happened. And then, of course, the other fallout with this appears to be that Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert are possibly at ends with each other. I believe there was a Donovan Mitchell interview where he said he doesn't know if his relationship with Rudy Gobert can be salvaged. And I would not be shocked as well if Rudy Gobert is just not looked upon favorably by the team. It's a frustrating one in that it's a very nuanced topic, Brian, where I think we'll be the economists, right? On the other hand, we'll need 20 hands. We can agree that what Rudy Gobert did was reckless and irresponsible, and especially given what the NBA had told players about the coronavirus. And who's the coach of the Utah Jazz? I'm sorry.
I think it's Quinn Snyder still.
So Quinn Snyder, coach of the Utah Jazz, had also been very. The reporting has come out that he was very upfront with his players, telling them to take it seriously. So Rudy Gobert acted impulsively and recklessly, and as we mention all the time on this show, that's millions of dollars in, it's by the way, it's an effed up way to phrase it this way, and the only reason I'm saying it this way is because the government actually defines it as this, Brian. That's millions of dollars of assets, right? That it was put at risk over this, over acting stupidly, ignoring a very, very serious risk. We can agree to say that is unacceptable. At the same time, it is tough to try and act as if the intent was malicious. And we should be careful there. Irrespective, I think players on the Jazz and in the NBA in whole are taking Rudy Gobert's actions as malicious, which is making Rudy Gobert kind of a pariah on the team. And we'll see what happens to the rest of his NBA career. Because that's where we are now. This is where it's gotten fascinating, Brian. I think to kind of get back to a little bit of normalcy, where we're at now is the Golden State Warriors, Brian. This has been something we've joked about, and I didn't think we'd get there this way. Golden State Warriors should trade. I think we either said Klay Thompson. I think way back in the day it was Klay Thompson. Earlier this season it was D'Angelo Russell, and then after the trade now Andrew Wiggins. We've been like the Utah Jazz should trade for Rudy Gobert, and I don't know if officially this is reminding me so damn much of Kevin Love for Klay Thompson back in the day. That's apparently on the table as at least a thought experiment. Rudy Gobert is probably out in Utah, and as a result, could the Utah Jazz trade him for Andrew Wiggins from the Golden State Warriors? And this has gotten the reason you brought this up is names that we respect on Twitter. Or at
I wouldn't
least
go that
follow
far. Yeah, follow is better.
Oh, I was going to say you.
No, I'm going to go at Warriors Twitter today for sure.
You're much better about the sub. You don't usually directly subtweet, whereas I subtweet all over the place. But we'll leave it at subtweets for now. The Warriors Twitter has been like, I don't know if I'd make this trade, and we are like, are you effing kidding me? So it's an interesting place to be. Where just to be clear on this again. We've always hated sports in that people we like are not people we would want to sign to our team if our goal was winning. And that is a very, very annoying place to be as a human being doing analytics, right? I can agree. Donovan Mitchell, if I have the choice between who do I want to hang out with, Rudy Gobert or Donovan Mitchell, at this point is Donovan Mitchell. But Rudy Gobert seems like a very interesting cat, right? Like does UFC, French, all this interesting stuff. But between
just a little
two,
immature still, right? That's how I see it. That when I watched that microphone video, I'm like, this guy's being really immature.
That is the funny part. We're both older, and it's like a majority of NBA players we would probably could not stand to be around because they're like young kids. We'd be like Jimmy Butler. We'd be like, these effing kids. Yeah. They're partying.
I mean, I'm not on Instagram. I really don't know what's going on, so pretty out of touch.
But yeah, so between the two, Donovan Mitchell is probably the cooler person to hang out with. Rudy Gobert, hands down, is the more productive player. And I'm going to let you talk about. I'll let you get some of your licks in it, particularly like I was loving this, right, Brian? Andy Bailey is one of these people that says stuff that I'm interested in.
And he's a Utah Jazz writer for Bleacher Report, right?
I was going to note that I basically had a falling out with almost all of the Utah Jazz sphere in years past for saying that Donovan Mitchell was overrated and Rudy Gobert was a better player. And a lot of them blocked me or we unfollowed each other. These were people that I'd followed for years, and suddenly we're yelling at each other, and we're just like, I'm going to unfollow you. Let's go our separate ways. This isn't worth it. So I am laughing my head off now to see the Donovan Mitchell stuff come back. Also, I'll stress, when I was calling Donovan Mitchell overrated, whenever there was a game that Donovan Mitchell, got like 40 points on like 20 shots, I'd get lambasted. And then nights when Donovan Mitchell would go like 2 for 19 and the Jazz would lose by 10, crickets. So that's where we're at now. To just cap that off before I let you get in on my general Donovan Mitchell point, I have taken a step back and said, I did get more invested in that fight than I should have, in large part because, it's easy when people call you wrong to double down. And I'm not saying I was wrong. The intensity of how much I was defending my stance was probably overstated. And the one good news about Donovan Mitchell is because he's on his rookie contract, he is not overpaid. He has had
Doesn't he
progression.
have a max extension kicking in, though?
Have they signed that
Pretty
officially?
sure that happened last year, but we'll have to check that.
Slow track for Donovan Mitchell really quick, because what I would argue you would want to do then, right? What I would argue you would likely want to do then with Donovan Mitchell, I am not seeing. I'm seeing him as a restricted free agent and at his club option.
Oh, maybe I'm wrong.
So, but even if that was true, what you do is you give Donovan Mitchell another year, and then if he doesn't progress, then you trade him before that's a risk. Would be how I would view it. But that's the key, right? Donovan Mitchell might be overrated by beat writers, but that doesn't matter to the Jazz winning, unless we find out there was an opportunity for a major upgrade. So that's really the key point there. But irregardless, it looks like the Jazz are going to go for a Mitchell versus Gobert split, and it looks like Mitchell's going to get keys to the team, and that could be fascinating.
Yeah, I still don't necessarily believe it. So there's rumors like Dallas Mavericks are pushing for him and all that, but there's so much time before anything real has to happen that I wouldn't be surprised if they repair the rift and keep going. But look, to me, this is an economics thing, Moneyball type of situation. And here's what I mean by that. Whenever okay, let me back up. Especially, let me go after Warriors Twitter now. Let's do that first. So, Warriors Twitter has all kinds of characteristics. Social media in general, right? Here's the first law of Warriors Twitter. Steph Curry is a god, and you cannot question him whatsoever. Latest example of that is, and maybe they're right, but the latest example of that is Steve Kerr said that that Andre Iguodala was Steph Curry's security blanket, and he doesn't have him anymore. And this is something that he's said about himself, actually, Steve Kerr, that is. He said, Iguodala is actually my security blanket. So he's just generally been calling Iguodala a security blanket. But when that came out like a month or two ago, Warriors Twitter said, fire Steve Kerr over this. He has disrespected Steph Curry. Like, that's how big they will go in for Curry. And, Curry might deserve it, but he is not. Let's not become a cult here, guys. Come on. Steph Curry can stand up for himself. He's a big boy. He can handle Steve Curry. You don't need to go to war over that. But, yeah, go ahead, Trey.
Frustrating comparable to Steph Curry that I have for you that applies hugely to Warriors is if you look at Chris Mullin's career. Chris Mullin, he's one of these was an amazing shooter too, right? I believe he was really
one of the
good
first
at
big three-point shooters in the 80s, yeah.
I do want to get his Boxscore Geeks numbers up in front of me. But essentially, Chris Mullin had 4 straight All-Star games, was a great player.
He was on Dream Team 1.
Team USA, I had his poster in my, I had the Dream Team poster. I think I still have it in this office somewhere. But anyway, so that Chris Mullin was great. Chris Mullin gets injured right near his 30s and just is done after that. He was one of these where I looked him over and I was like, because I was looking over, I think Warriors greats, and I was like, Chris Mullin was really, really good. What happened? And to remind people, we kind of had this conversation about Harrison Barnes, where there's a very interesting track that you can follow, which is if you follow Harrison Barnes from a rookie up through the 73-win season, Harrison Barnes up through the first 15 games of the 73-win Golden State Warriors season has a very natural age curve, which peaks at him being a good, I would, it's interesting. Great's such a subjective term, right, Brian? Because if I'm saying great to mean star player, he doesn't quite hit there. But if I'm saying great to be very, very good starter, he does hit that, right? So Harrison Barnes hit there. But then 15 games in to the 2015-2016 NBA season, Harrison Barnes gets injured, and he comes back, and he's just never the same. It's not a hard graph to watch. It's like you see this line going up and up and up and up. You see a gap in this line for 10, 15 games, and then the line is just never as high and middling near bad. And there is such a simple explanation to that, which is just to say he got injured and was done. And I think with Chris Mullin, it's interesting where he's really, really good. Actually,
yeah, I've got it up right now.
He had 2 injuries.
Man, he was really good for Don Nelson in the late 80s. That's what I remember watching him. He had some really good seasons.
So he's really good through 95. Yeah. Gets injured. So 95, he only plays 890 minutes, comes back the next season. He's fine, kind of starts getting his legs back in 97. Then you see a 98 only plays 600 fewer minutes than the season before. 99 plays 800 minutes than he did before the season before. 2,600 fewer than the seasons before. So it's like he never reaches the peaks he did in the late 80s, early 90s. Does kind of make a comeback, but they can never stay on the floor and is done.
I need to disagree with you. I didn't realize this. When he went to the Pacers, he was actually really good for 3 seasons. Check it out, Dre.
But again, the key right there is Chris Mullin's peak. Let's go. Great googly moogly, right? 1990, 1991. 3,330. Let me try again. 3,315 minutes played. Wins per 48 of about 250. So 2.5 times better than an average NBA player. 17.1 wins produced. Freaking amazing, right? His best season for the Pacers, you would say, is 1997, 1998. 2,177 minutes played, 8.2 wins produced. He's half as good in that season as he was at his peak. And that's not a diss. Again, age plus injury knocks people down. So that's what I'm saying is Chris Mullin at his peak, oh my God, this guy is freaking amazing. Gets injured, gets knocked down, kind of very Grant Hillish, right? Yeah. To I am a very good player. I am a very good player. You want me on your team. I didn't realize that about Chris Mullin either when I was looking it up, right? He did go to the NBA Finals to lose to the Lakers when he was on the Indiana Pacers. So that is true. But yeah, then after that, he just can't stand the court and goes down. So it's like we have a very obvious injury knocking him down kind of thing. And so the reason that compares to Steph Curry, right, is Steph Curry at his peak, 2015-2016, first unanimous MVP in NBA history, in large part due to non-anonymous voting. We argue that probably Michael Jordan and LeBron James and Shaquille O'Neal, if the votes were not anonymous, probably won respectively in, let me see if I can get this right. Was it 96 for Jordan, 2000 something for Bron? I already missed the question, right? Steph Curry, first unanimous MVP. He has missed a season to injury. He might come back, still great, half as good, and then if he can't stay healthy, might go down. He might follow the path of Chris Mullin, and that's a uncomfortable thing to share with Warriors fans, as you're noting, who are saying Steph Curry is a god, because we agree he was a god. We are always scared about what happens to players after injury. And Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, they might come back. They might David Robinson this up, come back healthy, win another title with Rudy Gobert. They might come back. And, both of those players, we agree, are very good. I think you and I are interesting on Klay Thompson. I think Klay Thompson is a good player, possibly worth his value if things go right. Easily belongs in the Hall of Fame just for his three-point accolades. You think he might be a little overrated, is what it is. But if both Curry and Klay come back like half as good or 3/4 as good as they were, that's a much different team, and they are both very expensive.
Yeah, the Warriors have so much work to do on their roster. I mean, this is like the, Patrick's elevator theory, right, versus the ladder. They have to climb up that ladder. They need so much help. So we'll have to see what happens. Maybe they're capable of building that back up really fast. I don't know. Another interesting Mullin-Curry comparison is Mullin shot 45% from 3 2 different seasons, 93 and 95, and Curry did that in his great season as well. So, yeah, shooting 45% for a season is pretty tough to do. So let me get to the second, theory of Warriors Twitter, which is why I brought this up, which is that they just totally gloss over defense. Like, it's unbelievable. Like, I'll subtweet someone. I can't remember who it was, so I'll subtweet as one of like 2 or 3 different people who was saying, the future Warriors front court is Pascal at power forward and Draymond at center. Pascal can do all these things, at the, on the elbow and initiate offense and da-da-da-da-da. And I replied, well, can he guard power forwards, though? You're going to have 2 guys that are 6'6", 6'5", playing power forward and center. Is that going to work? And he just said, maybe we'll have to see. The point is, defense is just an afterthought for Warriors Twitter. It's almost like they think Don Nelson is still coaching and we don't care about defense. But we should. You need size. You need defense. And that's why where we come to Gobert is the overall thinking is that Gobert is fine for the regular season, but once you get to the playoffs and the finals, you just can't play 7-footers anymore. It doesn't make any sense. You have to just go full small. I've never understood that. That never makes any sense to me. I guess the theory is the refs will ref the playoffs different from the regular season, so you need to change what you do. I think that's stupid. You have to go with what brought you there, right? So Gobert is good on offense. He's good on defense. The Warriors need size. Of course they should trade for him. The Warriors Twitter needs to stop underrating size and defense. Defense is half the game, and it matters. That's all. And you should want Gobert. He's really good.
This is putting me in pain, but goodness, I really wish Gobert could learn to shoot free throws because he's not quite as bad as Shaq, but this is painful. Gobert has, like, in the playoffs, 63.7% effective field goal percentage. Hot diggity, 58.8% free throw. Although last season he got up to 78.3, so maybe he's improving. Maybe I'm getting this wrong, Brian. Let me see how his.
And while you're looking at up, here's the thing: there is something to small ball, right? You don't need to play Gobert 48 minutes a game. You could throw a small lineup in there for a little while, but the way I feel like the Warriors roster was last year, and the way that, again, this is about calling out the Warriors media and fans. The way they want it to be is literally 0 big players on the roster. They want everyone on the roster to be like 6'7" and smaller, and it just makes no sense to me. You need to have a toolbox, right? You need to say, okay, in this situation, yeah, we'll go small. We'll put Draymond at center. But in other situations, we do need to have a 7-footer in there for extended run. And there's just you have a roster of 12, plus players. You can deactivate some of them. There's just never a reason to limit your roster so much. You should have flexibility. You should have different types of players that could do different things. You shouldn't have 12 guys that are 6'7" and can shoot threes on your roster. That just doesn't make sense.
So I'm going to issue an interesting apology criticism. Okay. So first off, I would like to publicly apologize, kind of, to Scottie Pippen. I say kind of because Scottie Pippen says all sorts of stupid stuff, so I'm apologizing to Scottie Pippen's stats. I could give a blank if the person is mad at me. But people were asking Scottie Pippen or Draymond Green, and I said, so this is what makes Twitter funny. I completely forgot this subject, Brian, we were going to put on the show. I might put it on. But basically, I was like, Scottie Pippen, obviously, you might make the case for 2015, 2016 Draymond Green as the best season between the two, but Scottie Pippen was clearly the better player. I apologize, Scottie Pippen, because Scottie Pippen's peak in terms of relative to his peers is far superior to Draymond Green, like 94, 95 Scottie Pippen without Michael Jordan, almost 18 wins produced. Now, here's the criticism, though, Brian. Scottie Pippen was a small forward, a versatile defensive lockdown small forward, right? That's what he was known for. So was Draymond Green, except Draymond Green is routinely, as you were just noting, played at power forward and center. So it's interesting in that I think Draymond Green would be closer to Scottie Pippen in relative value if the Warriors played him as a small forward and did like the Andrew Bogut stuff back in the day, right? And you can't. We've always argued this. I hate to give him any credence. In fact, I won't.
Give it to John Fogerty then. Creedence Clearwater Revival. Let's go.
Oh, not bad. You're being on top of the ball with the references today, Brian. But anyway, there is a well-known sabermetrician, that's baseball, that was talking about a player that another analytics person said, like, if you adjusted it, that person hit like 102 home runs. And he said something like, well, if they didn't count as home runs when he hit him, they don't count as home runs now. So it's an interesting take. We run into that problem all the time with players where we go, on the one hand, we can look at Draymond Green and say, goodness, if you transported Draymond Green to the 90s Bulls and played him as a small forward, what an amazing team that could be. We are not saying that Draymond Green is not a good power forward center, but we are noting that there is a very real trade-off. That Draymond Green is an above-average power forward center, which is why you can get away with playing him there, but you could also just play a normal power forward center and then have Draymond just beat the crap out of his opposing small forward, which is essentially what happened with Scottie Pippen. So that's the difference between the two. So my point being, it's frustrating in that you could actually, to that argument I just made, Scottie Pippen versus Draymond Green, go, Scottie Pippen was a better player for the Bulls than Draymond Green, but that's because Scottie Pippen was more well-placed than Draymond Green was. We argue that Draymond Green as power forward center was not a brilliant strategical maneuver. We argue it was a mistake that the Warriors were able to get away with because they had Steph Curry and Andre Iguodala, the security blanket, and of course Kevin Durant, right? That's why they were able to do that. And a comparable, right, is Glenn Baby Davis for the Boston Celtics. He had the ring with the Boston Celtics. No one would be mistaken for thinking that Glenn Baby Davis is a great defender. That team was still great on defense because it turns out if you have Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce and Rajon Rondo and Ray Allen and Kendrick Perkins, Jesus Christ, Kendrick Perkins has turned into something, hasn't he, Brian? Kendrick Perkins, when healthy, and I just forgot their amazing six. They had a really good six man of the year.
An analytical show with Perkins and Scottie Pippen on it together. What do you think about that?
I'm out, Brian. I'm out.
Well, here's the thing about Pippen versus Draymond, though. So if you're going to say Draymond's a better defender than Pippen, even though Pippen, like you said, is considered a lockdown defender at the time, I can buy that. People say he does unique things defensively. That's fine. Maybe as a passer as well. Pretty unique to have a forward that passes like a point guard, right? But Pippen just did every other part of the game elite Hall of Fame level, and Draymond is just a little more limited than Pippen in the things he can do. So, yeah, I don't think that's a close comparison either. And again, to your injury point, most of Draymond's problems I think have come from injury. He's not played as well when he's been coming off of injuries, and he's played through injury as well, which makes you play worse too. He'll never complain about it, but I suspect that's been part of the issue.
Yeah, and so just to our I guess to finish our point on like would Gobert fit is obviously absolutely. I think pre-show I was kind of making fun of the Warriors and NBA Twitter for being very much like the Silicon Valley mindset, right? You always chase the new thing, and there are times where the old thing works just fine. Like Warren Buffett was the comparable we made, notoriously did not invest in the dot-com bubble era in any of like the internet startups. And you go, oh my God, you missed on Google. But as you noted, yeah, well, he also missed on pets.com and Excite. Whereas Warren Buffett, notoriously is like, I'll stick with Coca-Cola and Microsoft. And those things did just well. And like you can try and make fun of Warren Buffett for missing on a dot-com that went, that was a unicorn, right? And valuated at $1 billion. But you can't also say, well, he went with the stuff that worked. And we still see great bigs do well in the NBA. What they need to do might have gone up. And for what it's worth, the wins produced formula, as an example, adjusts for that, right? Like you have to be better than your peers at things. And bigs are starting to shoot more threes. I'll give an amazing shout out to Steve Fenn on Twitter. This is Stat Hunting. If you are interested, he teaches a Tableau course for introductory Tableau course. If you are interested in that, Tableau is one of the most popular tools for making data visualizations. I assure you, you've seen them everywhere, especially with COVID visualizations.
Arturo's putting out a daily update if you want to see that. At American Numbers, follow him.
Oh, okay, we both agree. So again, American Numbers on Twitter for daily visualizations. And so I've been taking Steve Fenn's class, and he was doing 3-point rate, a lot of charts using 3-point data in the NBA history. So here's a funny thing, Brian. First year of the NBA 3-point line, the 3-point rate, that is the number of shots collectively the league took from three, was 4%, roughly that. Might be a little off, but around 4%. If you go look that up at Basketball Reference, they do have that stat. If you look in the last year, 2020, before the NBA was shut down, the 3-point rate for bigs, centers, players that, according to Basketball Reference, were classified as centers, 12%. So, yes, the skill set and abilities that centers in the modern NBA need to have has changed, but that doesn't mean that effective 7-footers, people like Rudy Gobert, who are very good at getting the ball through the hoop, very good at playing defense, it does not mean their skill sets have diminished. And if you're worried, if you're like, well, Gobert can't guard the perimeter, it's like, well, then get a freaking security blanket like Andre Iguodala, have him do it, and you can build a team there. So our take really is Warriors, if you can get Rudy Gobert, that is a game changer. Go for it.
Yeah, and this is the economics point and again, this is Moneyball stuff, right? Moneyball isn't really about on-base percentage being undervalued. It's more about how much are you paying for different stats, right? And at the time, Billy Bean and Sandy Ellerson found this stat, on base percentage, that they could get as an undervalued stat and, pay players less money for. So I think that's happening in the NBA right now with size and with centers. Again, we go back to the Chris Mullin era, the 1980s, when I started watching, and that was an exciting time to watch basketball, right? The pace was even higher than it is now. Not very efficient, so not great basketball necessarily, outside of, Jordan Bird and those kind of guys, Magic Johnson. But great to watch, right? Then we get to the 90s, which is kind of like, I don't want to go as far as to say it was a dark ages of basketball. There was really good players in the 90s, of course, but there were some ridiculous teams and playoff series. Like, the non-Jordan years, right? We were watching the Rockets versus the Knicks, right? Think about the front courts of those those two teams that were met in the finals. It was Patrick Ewing at center, Charles Oakley at power forward, who was 6'10", 6'11", Anthony Mason at small forward, who is also 6'10", who'd probably play center now. Those are the three starting players. Mason was very skilled, but he was not small, that's for sure. Same thing with the Rockets, right? They had Akeem at center. They had Otis Thorpe at power forward, who, again, he was 6'10", big, beefy guy, would probably play center now. A young Robert Horry was their small forward, and he went on to play center later in his career, I think, or power forward for the Lakers.
Like the Spurs, right? But wow, okay.
Yeah, and the Spurs. He played for all these different teams. So the 90s was super big, plotting basketball, not as fun to watch. Main reason was the rules were different, right? You couldn't double team in the post, so they just dumped the ball in and let these big guys go at it. And, that the rules changed, fortunately, and we've had, a better era where things are, players are starting to get smaller. We're starting to see more interesting, I think, basketball, more three-point shooting, spreading the floor, more of the Spurs and Warriors style back cuts and all that stuff. So it's great. I think it's better now than it was then. But the pendulum's starting to swing too far, at least perception-wise. I'm not sure if the league is like this, but again, I'm going after the media and social media here. It's definitely the case there. Even though you shouldn't, so here's my point to finish this off. Even though you shouldn't pay as much money for big players probably as you did in the 1990s, you shouldn't pay as little as people are saying you should now. It's not that there's complete 100% value or zero value. It's something in between. So find the value. Don't just say, let's play no one over 6'7". So, yeah, get with the program, Warriors Twitter. Come on.
I mean, we just argue that all the time. You're buying. The goal of an NBA front office, if you're talking about winning, is to buy relative stats. That's the rough part, right? One of the things I bring up all the time as an example about, say, Donovan Mitchell is my favorite player to do this with, is like, his shooting efficiency is like the same as Kobe Bryant. If you look at us, we actually said Kobe Bryant in the 90s and 2000s was a good shooter. We say Donovan Mitchell is not a good shooter. The reason being the NBA has gotten better at shooting, right? The NBA, funny note about Kobe Bryant, he was not a good three-point shooter, like, ever. He could not shoot threes, which is funny, right? He had I think 32.9% career three-point shooting. He was never really a great three-point shooting player. You could get away with that in the 90s and 2000s. You can't get away with that now. And I think Donovan Mitchell is a decent three-point shooter, but not great, and takes too many bad shots that don't make up for it. So that's where he is at. And so when you're buying stuff in the NBA, you're basically going, I want 2% above three. Can I get a player that takes 5 3-pointers, 2% above league average? What do I have to pay for that? Can I get 3 rebounds above league average, right? Et cetera, et cetera. If you basically construct the team that way, that's what you're paying for. And what you're kind of saying we're noticing in the NBA is teams are really, really flocking towards 3-point shooters and also not realizing that there's been inflation on that, right? As I was just noting, this great stat hunting course I'm taking, you go back to the 90s or 80s, and you find a player that shoots 6 3-pointers a game at 36%, it is like, oh my God, what is going on? I think Larry Bird exceeded 40% three-point shooting and took like 3 a game one year. And you just wonder, if Larry Bird had just rained hell, had he done Don Nelson style three-point shooting, what could have happened, right?
I mean, Dale Ellis was the only one who did it, right? He was like the only guy to take a high volume that I remember, but I'm probably wrong. I
think that sounds right. I'm trying to remember because I've looked over this, and it's really funny to notice the ramp up. and the players that hit it. Like I think I actually, yeah, we'll hop to this, Brian. So first up, as you've noticed, I haven't really been blogging at Boxscore Geeks, and we haven't really been podcasting at Boxscore Geeks. But something I did start getting back to actually is nerdnumbers.com. I have something called the Daily Number Blurb. And so if you go to nerdnumbers.com, it used to be a WordPress blog. I'm actually putting it up into a new site. And so I put up a daily number blurb. So it's not quite a blog, but close. And I'm not 100% doing daily, but I'm coming close to. And what my goal is about daily. So again, I'm not guaranteeing daily because that's a hard thing to fill, especially with like a kid that wakes up at 6 in the morning. So this morning. But a stat I looked up, this is for 2020, April 3rd. But Steph Curry being the first player in NBA history to score over 400 threes. For comparison, I noted that it wasn't until the 94 NBA season where the Houston Rockets scored over 400 threes, and they did so at 33.4% shooting efficiency from three. So, yeah, the NBA has just, has not been good at threes traditionally, but then that number has been ramping up. So when teams like, man, we really want a 36% three-point shooter, it's like that is becoming less and less valuable. Whereas the rebounding thing, that's still part of the game, right? Getting the ball back is still part of the game. And we've noticed that getting a little undervalued. The good news, I think, that is key is it hasn't swung so much that players are bad, right? Rudy Gobert is still on close to a max contract. Right. It's just an inflated close to a max contract, which means that's the funny thing is because of the asymmetry of talent in the NBA and the fact that you can never play star players what they're worth because there is a ceiling on how much you are allowed to play players, that if you can find talented bigs at reduced contracts or max contract bigs that, are even, like I said, like Rudy Gobert, a little below the max, they are huge steals. And we think teams still are not taking enough advantage of this.
Well, yeah, there's two different ways to look at it, right? And what I'm saying is it's a balancing act. And, if the scales get too far in one direction, then people can find, arbitrage or whatever economic term you want to use, take advantage of that, and then it'll balance out again, right? What I think the people I'm talking out against are saying is like history is a straight line, basically, that the NBA has been heading towards smaller players and more three-point shooting, and it's just going to keep heading that way. Basically, I don't know, until 50 years later, there's like only 6-foot-tall players in the NBA. Of course, we know that's not going to happen. That's a ridiculous example. But I think that's part of the mindset. And just to kind of pre-buttle, people who would say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You pencil neck geeks don't watch the games. And here's what the coaches say about why small players are so good and all that. Here's what I'll say is I think three-point shooting is really good. And I've heard you and Patrick especially say maybe teams still aren't shooting enough three-point shooters, right? Maybe, the Rockets are pushing the limit, but maybe they could shoot even more than they are now. But here's the thing. I want to differentiate between your coaching strategy of how many threes you take and what your roster construction is, right? You can still take a ton of threes and have a 7-footer out there on the court, right? Like you can have players with different roles. So
almost like the game is built that way. And it's funny. Yeah. I think basketball is a unique sport in that other sports identify that players have different roles. And part of that's just the rules, right? Like
yes.
On football, you are explicitly labeled as an offensive or a defensive player. There are players, I forget what that term's called. Remember there's that horrible, good, horrible. It has Sinbad football movie, Unnecessary Roughness.
Yeah.
Where because of it's about a college team and because of restrictions, they have players play both sides of the field, which is atypical, right? And in theory, you could do that. I think like special teams players, you could in theory kind of cross a little. But typically, you have a defined role in football that you have the same in baseball, and even to a degree hockey, right? You have players explicitly listed as defensemen and goalies, right? Basketball is a sport that has very defined roles because of the rules, but I think people don't acknowledge them, right? I mean, the issue is you were talking like old rules about why post players used to be more valuable. The NBA does still have the lane, right? If you look at the little oval and rectangle in front of the rim, there's two lanes, these two little rectangles on each side. and you are only allowed to have like one person in there and only for 3 seconds at a time. So you are limited in how many players you can put close to the hoop, which is just a construction of the game, right? That is how the game is built. Additionally, since you only have one ball, you end up with like a point guard scenario. So basketball has roles, but people, because it's possible to have a player like Magic Johnson or LeBron James play every role, people come under the impression that there aren't really roles in basketball. It's like you're saying, for most NBA teams, you want to do roster construction. You build different skill sets together because even we could, I think, at any given point in NBA history, probably select 5 players that have all of the skills you want and put a team together, right? You could do, and by the way, they basically did do this with like the dream team, right? Like I believe David Robinson, Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, Larry Bird. I don't know, like Hakeem Olajuwon. Oh
Yep,
my goodness,
Hakeem was
right?
on there too. Yep.
Hakeem Olajuwon wasn't on the first dream team. Either he was on the second one, or I forget if he did another country. But
Yeah, I
those
can't
five
remember.
players, those 5 players do everything, and you can put them together. Shocker, right? Every single one of those players is a max contract player for a different franchise. So like that's the problem with it. When people are like positionless basketball, it's like you can't do that because there aren't enough players to let you do that.
Right. And just the final point on this, we brought this up, over this season is, before the season shut down, if you look at who the best teams were, they were the teams with size, basically, especially the Bucks, the Jazz as well. We were talking about, yeah, teams size still wins in the NBA, and I feel like fans and social media they're getting out ahead of where things are. They're saying here's where things are going, and I just don't think they're necessarily right. That's all. So that's
I do give you a counterpoint, which is huge too. Although there's a funny counterpoint in that counterpoint. The Toronto Raptors are amazingly good, and a lot of it has to do with their backcourt. I know he got an All-Star nod. I mess up his name every time. I'm going to try and get it right. Brian Pascal Siakam.
Yes, you got it.
There we go. Gets a lot of love, and we think he's a above-average player, but not great. But Fred VanVleet, Kyle Lowry in particular. Who is there? Another couple of good ones that I'm drawing. Oh, Giannonobi
had a great season.
These are great, great players, and this is something like Dave Barry's brought up before. It's like the goal in NBA is to get winning players. So if you get a bunch of good players, it doesn't matter where, right? Because to the exact same point I just made about like really good players, I'd argue you'd still need some size. But I mean, as an example, Chris Paul and Steph Curry are amazing. And if you had those 2 players and a bunch of average players on your team, that team still competes for a title, in my opinion, right? We freaking saw that with James Harden plus Chris Paul, right? They almost won a title. So it varies where you have to get production from. But the Toronto Raptors do show, yeah, you can have a really talented backcourt that do it. But then, of course, the pain point that you should have for the Raptors is they are a good team with an aging, ancient Marc Gasol. They did have Jonas Valanciunas, who is playing very well. And if they had Jonas Valanciunas instead of Marc Gasol, I'd argue they'd be even better.
So I think the Raptors actually support my point big time, and I wish I had brought them up. And here's why. So, yeah, their backcourt players are traditionally better. Lowry, he's getting a little older and had a little bit of a down year, but still pretty good. If you look at the Raptors for this year, there are no like stars or superstar level individual players. They're all just really good above average players. And so then you're like, how are they the best team if they just kind of have above average players? If you look at it, it's all defense. They're one of the best defensive teams in the league. That's why Nick Nurse, as the coach, is getting a lot of credit, as he should, right? The coach is responsible for a lot of defense. And again, I'm talking about these big players mostly in terms of defense, not offense. You can make arguments to me that an all small ball lineup is perfect on offense. I can't argue with you there. Maybe small players are better than big players on offense, but defense is where the size matters. And what is the Raptors' front court? It's Anunoby and Siakam. Those are big forwards, 6'9", 6'10", versatile, can defend anywhere, very good defensive players. And who are the centers, like you said? It's Gasol, and then also Serge Ibaka, who's, can shoot from the outside, but is pretty much a defensive specialist. So I would say the Raptors are definitely a big team.
I'm going to have to look at why Ibaka's not better, because he's rebounding well and scoring well, so maybe it's just like turnovers or something.
Yeah.
Mark can't shoot. But yeah, that's an interesting point on that. Yeah, well, geez, Marcus, I have no idea. I'm going to have to look at these in depth. But yeah, okay, so I will still take, I think to your roster construction point, we are saying where you get your power from doesn't matter, but you do still need to fill in those other gaps. And I think to your point, the Raptors have. All right, Brian, I'm going to realize we're getting towards the end, so I'm going to lightning round some of this
Oh
stuff.
yeah, we're over an hour now. Yeah.
I noticed Mental Samurai with Chris Ye is back. Friend of the show, Chris Ye, will be a future competitor on the show. They're redoing season 1. They were going to have a season 2, but then coronavirus shut it down. But we are a huge fan of the show. Mental Samurai, a reality TV show that airs Thursdays on Fox. It has nerds strapped into a gyroscope, and they have to answer trivia and knowledge and memory questions in under 5 minutes. So it's a lot of fun to watch. I basically charted the box score and I'm slowly reintegrating the data at nerdnumbers.com. I have a spoiler chart there, so don't show it on the show, Brian. But if you want to go there and take a look at how some of the winners from this season did, you can check that out. I'm just going to give this more of a shout out. I said we could do a full segment on it, Brian, but then we talked politics. Thank you for letting me bait you into that. And by bait you, I mean I just talked it.
Well, maybe we can save it for next time.
But I was
more
just
in depth. Yeah.
there. Okay, we'll save it for next time, but I will give the teaser. I was going to Topalov, I think you say the V as an F because it's Russian, is one of the most fascinating chess players I've discovered, and he fueled the last 2 Daily Number blurbs, which is looking at World Chess Championship history, which is, again, we've been talking a ton about this. I'll just give the articles a shout out, Brian. I forgot to put it on the script, so I don't even know if I can do it as an official shout out. But there was a fantastic article that I found on, I think, Slate in 2013 that was noting how bad the World Chess Championship was and how it really needed to go to a tennis-style system, meaning like 4 Grand Slams a year, right? Major tournaments that the best names competed in, but no one tournament that had the title World Chess Championship. We agree with that. And then I've had some stats on nerdnumbers.com for the last couple of days about that, so those are fun to look at. I'm going to lightning round a couple of the others. We did talk the election, Brian. I'm going to leave the Hall of Famer for future, but just say Roger Maris isn't in the Baseball Hall of Fame. The Baseball Hall of Fame is invalid. That's enough for me there. Gar Forman was fired, Brian, finally from the Chicago Bulls. At a time, it doesn't matter at all, so good timing, Chicago Bulls. We have definitive reasons as to why Kevin Garnett's jersey is not retired in Minnesota. These are just things that have piqued our interest.
Interesting.
And then we haven't gotten a chance to read it, but maybe we'll do a book club or something on it. Ethan Sherwood Strauss wrote a book about the Light Years Warriors, Brian. I am tentatively curious, though I am afraid at the narratives that might be in it, but we'll have to wait till we see it. And then the last kind of sad, not really a shout out, just more of a sad note. Karl Anthony Towns lost his mother to coronavirus. Tragic loss, a real sad thing to hear. And if anybody's followed Karl Anthony Towns, he said effusive stuff about his mother. So this is a hard loss and a tough thing to have. I'll let you, I know I threw like 20 things at the wall at you there, Brian. I'll let you comment on any of them you want, and then we'll get to what else is on.
No, I mean, yeah, the Strauss book is interesting. I'm a little, the title has me a little bit worried because it's called The Victory Machine, right? And the machine implies that the players are just kind of interchangeable parts, and it's the Warriors franchise that is responsible for it. And you know that I've said a million times, I'm skeptical of the franchise's front office decision making, and really it's more about Curry and Durant, and a couple, Draymond Green, Andre Iguodala. It's really about players. It's not about the front office. So, who knows if he even gets to pick the title? Maybe the publisher picks it, and the book's not about that at all. So I'll wait and see. But yeah, the title has me concerned. That's all.
I agree. And then some of the Amazon comments I talked to. I'll give him penultimate. I always fall back and forth between you and Jeremy Britt being the ultimate and penultimate Warriors fan. Brian, I'll let you keep the ultimate title this week. But I talked a little bit with him about it, and he noted some Amazon comments to me. And, it's one of those, you can't judge a book by its cover. You can't judge it by the Amazon comments. So like I said, I'm a little scared of the narrative it's going to take. Another example of this, one of our favorites, Coach Nick at B-Ball Breakdown, does some of the best video breakdowns of basketball on the internet. He's getting some fame today because he's showing a play that is technically not a travel but looks like a travel. And then, of course, people are upset with him going, that's a travel. And he's going, I'm sorry, the rules say it's not a travel. This is legal. You cannot like it, but that's not my fault. This is a legal move. And I said he might end up at Rex Chapman level fame doing like Travel or Nah as a series of.
Oh, man. You know what? I didn't realize until that Rex Chapman ESPN article came out that he's only been big time for less than a year. Like this, he's really built his account up as an influencer really quickly. So, Yeah, that's interesting. Rex Chapman is a workhorse of social media.
It's a rough one, right? Because I think, as with a lot of content aggregators, when I was reading the article and reading people saying there's a question as to how much credit he gives, et cetera. But it is
Sure.
one of the, if you leave that at the door, the Rex Chapman blocker charge series is one of the funnier just amalgamations of hilarious videos with the tagline blocker charge, which of course has NBA connotations. Um, but regardless, Coach Nick has a video out about Tracy McGrady, and he keeps saying like Tracy McGrady was one of the most naturally score at will players I've ever seen and stuff. And I'm like, with apologies, the numbers just don't back that. Like, I bring up the video of Tracy McGrady scoring, I think, like 13 points in 2 minutes or something all the time. It was, and by the way, this happened against the number one defense Spurs that season. This Tracy McGrady on the Rockets had an upset win for the Rockets to set the Spurs. I forget the year, but if you look up like Tracy McGrady 13 points, you'll find it really quick. And it's one of the most amazing performances I've ever seen. But if we look at Tracy McGrady's aggregate numbers, he was just not an effective scorer. And whenever someone's like this, it's the Moneyball point, right? There's a quote in the movie Moneyball where all of these scouts, the old school, right, the old guard scouts, like, this guy is such a great hitter. And, Billy Bean, Brad Pitt, right, cuts through it and goes, if he's such a great hitter, why doesn't he hit? And it's like, Brady shot below average for his career for a guard and had like one season at 56%. The reason, by the way, we did think Tracy McGrady was great was very Scottie, and Scottie Pippen's the same boat. Scottie Pippen wasn't a great scorer, right? I think he had a couple of above average seasons, but like his true shooting was like 53.8%, which was passable in the 80s and 90s, but by no means great. Michael Jordan, for perspective, was like in the 60s, 60% true shooting. Tracy McGrady did everything, right, and was a player that could do everything, and in certain games could take over and score offensively. But with respect, you can't tell me Tracy McGrady was a score at will player if a majority of the time he did not score at will, if a majority of the time the opponents managed to keep him below average.
Yeah, and I've always seen McGrady very similar to his contemporary Kobe Bryant, right? In that they were both really good players, but it was for the non-shooting things, right? They did everything pretty well. And it was just, of course they were really skilled, but it was just a product of the time, right? And I'm showing the Coach Nick video right now on the stream. And, McGrady's just pulling up from mid-range from 18 feet. He pulls up with like a foot right over the three-point line and hits one, like all these long, twos. And those just are bad shots. So no matter how skillful he was, they just were not taking very good shots in the late 90s.
And to be clear, because we brought this point up a lot, Kobe Bryant we thought was an above average scorer, and there is kind of a tragedy in the 2003-2004 season, because for those that don't remember, Shaq and Kobe, one of the greatest pairings in NBA history. I even agree with this. I wrote an article doing the best duos by positions. So like at least as of 5 or 6 years ago, the best shooting guard center combination I'd found on a team together was Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant. I don't know if Clint Capella and James Harden had time to get close to them. But so they were an amazing duo, right? Shooting guard, center. And then in 2004, the Lakers pick up Gary Payton and Karl Malone. And so that's arguably permanent Kobe Bryant's best year in his career because he's deferring a lot more. And then the Lakers lose Gary Payton and Karl Malone and Shaquille O'Neal, and they have nothing, right? They're a horrible team the next season. And Kobe Bryant takes on the role of scorer. And, in those 2 seasons before they get Pau Gasol, he is just shooting the ball a ton, right? I think he gets like 36 points per game. Of course, I think that's when he gets, the 81-point game against Toronto. And from that point on, it's like, I'm a scorer. I'm always going to shoot 20 plus shots a game. And you wonder, had the Lakers had a little bit more stability, had Shaquille O'Neal and Phil Jackson stuck around, would Kobe Bryant have been a 25-point-a-game player, getting, higher assists, which he could clearly do? We don't know. But Kobe Bryant, we do think, was an above-average scorer. He just he never, relative to his peers like, say, Michael Jordan or, the more modern ones, Steph Curry, James Harden, didn't hit that elite level of scoring, but he was well-rounded enough in everything else that he was still a very good player.
Yeah, and I'm probably pretty biased against Kobe for his last, 3 seasons or so when he was just kind of cashing the checks and was not a very good scorer. But you're right. Earlier on, of course, he was. And I'll just throw out a little, NBA draft preview here. I guess this is a question to the commenters. Is there's a player in the draft this year that could go as high as number 1 overall. Anthony Edwards out of Georgia. He's a 6'5" shooting guard that shot 29% from 3.
Oh,
so my
A3.
Yeah, so my question is, why do you want a 6'5" shooting guard that shoots 29% from 3? If you look at what people are saying about him, why he's so highly rated, well, he's one of the most athletic players in the draft. He can, whatever that means, he can take it to the bucket. That's really good. We like guys that can drive to the basket and finish. So, maybe he's a guy with potential, but man, if you're taking a shooting guard at the top of the draft, they better be, a guy you think can shoot 40% or more. That's what I think. So tell me what the deal with Anthony Edwards is, guys.
Yeah, how high should Anthony Edwards go? That is a fantastic question. All right. Apologies for stuffing, I think, half of the script until the last end of the show, Brian, but it was cathartic to talk a little politics, especially when it was good news at the top of the show. We've replaced shout-outs with the What Else Is On, so obviously with most live sports, excluding, as we noted, the horse competition and NBA 2K competitions, and esports, Brian, which I'm still not on board with. We've been talking other stuff we've been watching, so I'm going to give 2 parts. I'm going to say I watched the Pixar movie Onward. I really, really dug it. It's on Disney+, and I made a funny tweet that got a little love today where I said, if you're an adult and you have Disney+, it means you have access to all of Disney's library. If you are a parent of a toddler and have Disney+, it means you have access to 3 movies, of which you get to watch maybe half of one before your kid gets bored and either wants to do something else or watch the most popular musical number in that movie again. I have listened to Hakuna Matata from the live-action Lion King many, many times this week, Brian. I'll let you get anything. What else is on?
Yeah, I've been watching some TV for sure. I think I mentioned this last time, but I watched The Expanse earlier on in the quarantine. That was a good science fiction show. In terms of live shows, I've been watching Westworld and Better Call Saul. Westworld is pretty opulent. It's kind of a ridiculous show and very shallow story in some ways, but it's very cool visually. And the ideas are pretty cool, too. So this new season is a lot different from the other ones, and I've been enjoying it. But Better Call Saul, I think, is an incredible show. I like it more than Breaking Bad. One of the best visual shows ever. And I love that it's slower paced. Most people hate that, but you don't have a lot of shows where you just drink in, the scenery with the camera like Better Call Saul does. And the characters, I think, are really interesting, too, compared to almost any show on TV. So I love Better Call Saul. I also have to say I've been watching Peaky Blinders, the British gangster show. Like a lot of kind of organized crime shows, it's just sort of like a right-wing cosplay, what people wish they could do in society and be a complete maniac. But, again, very cool period piece. It takes place in the early 1900s. Cool costumes and cool kind of historical side, too, because, part of the reason why all these gangsters are maniacs is they all have PTSD from fighting in World War I in the trenches. So kind of an interesting historical show as well. That's what I've been watching.
It's interesting. My wife's a big fan of Peaky Blinders. I've never really watched it. And I was going to say, just as kind of like trivia on Better Call Saul, one of the more interesting parts to me is the main character, Saul. It's played by Bob Odenkirk,
yes.
who is the most prolific writers, like of famous jokes. Like he's, I think, an SNL writer and other stuff. He has been a writer on so many famous things that that it's ridiculous. So, like, if you're bored, go look up Bob Odenkirk.
Yeah, go watch Kids in the Hall if you haven't. Or not Kids in the Hall, I'm sorry. Mr. Show. Mr. Show is what he did. With Bob and David, yeah.
It's one of the more famous, like, never really hit mainstream popularity, but I think, like, a lot of people cite it as just, like, important culture.
Because both him and David Cross went on to do really big things, so it's a good kind of historical, where they started kind of show, I think. And it's very short, too. It's only, I think, 3 seasons with only a few episodes, yeah.
Not bad. And, yeah, Bob, like I said, Bob Odenkirk's ridiculous. All right, well, that has been our show. We'll see if we're back in a couple weeks, Brian. Okay.
Hang in there, everyone.
Yes, hang in there, everybody. This has been the Boxscore Geek Show. If you found us not through the website, we are at boxscoregeeks.com. We go live. When we go live, usually it's on a Tuesday around 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, twitch.tv/nerdnumbers. miss the live, so you can catch the recaps, channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. And then, of course, we do have it in podcast form, iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geek Show. I'm Dre Alvarez. You can find me on Twitter as Nerd Numbers. Brian Foster, you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. Have a week, everyone, and we'll see you when we see you.